You're live.
Hi.
Hi, good evening, everyone. If we have, I think we already have some audience here. Let everybody say a hello so that we know there are some people listening to us, and then we are going to begin in a few seconds. Thank you so much for joining in this session, Dr. Kapoor, and taking out your time. A
No,
lot
thank
of
you so
people
much.
a lot of people have been requesting me to do sessions on this issue because it impacts a lot of people and is relevant to a lot of parents today. So thank you so much for taking out your time. And all right, hi Suprakash, hi Arun, hi Anand. We have decent enough audience right now, and thank you so much, Arun. Suprakash says hello, Dr. Kapoor.
Hi.
Hi
Hi,
Amit, hi
Suprakash.
Puneet.
No, I think
All right, I think
exactly.
we'll begin.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I
tell
think I
me.
like what you just said, that it was extremely relevant. I'm hoping by the end of this conversation, the number of people who will find this topic relevant will increase. Because I think
Yeah,
hopefully by the end of it, they will realize that it is not just about uh, a mother-father tussle for a child. It's not just that.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Dr. Kapoor, if you
Wonderful.
could come a little closer to the laptop, yeah,
Volume is becoming an issue.
this is much better.
Better? Okay. Sounds great.
Yep. All right, so let me formally begin this. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, for joining this live. We are with Dr. Rakesh Kapur. He has an organization called Bamboo Tree. A person with extremely solid research on shared parenting and the patterns on parental alienation across the world, and also a part of a public interest litigation on the same issue in the Supreme Court. So we're glad to have you with us today, Dr. Kapoor, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining, whosoever is watching this. Last week, a few days back, I did a session with Pooja Bedi where we spoke about uh, how one parent can actually, make all the difference when two people are divorcing by being kind, empathetic, and keeping the child actually above everything else and leaving the bitterness of a divorce aside and realizing the importance of both the parents in a child's life, and hence providing access, providing visitation rights, and providing a healthy, a very humane environment to the child, for the child to grow, keeping all the differences aside and everything. Today we are, taking that discussion forward, so to say, and bring more research and scientific point of view behind this issue, and some of the things that people have stereotyped about parenting, some myths around what people think when it comes to, divorce and a child being with both the parents, or situation of a child, or the upbringing of a child in case of in situation of a separation. So we're going to discuss few facts and myths, and later on I will of course try to take some questions of yours, though I think the conversation with Dr. Kapoor is going to be quite extensive. So I'm not too sure how much time we will have for the questions, but I'll certainly take some very relevant questions. So let's begin, Dr. Kapoor. The basic thing in these matters, and a term that anybody who is, sort of in the environment where they have seen what happens in the case of a divorce or a separation and where are kids involved, we keep on hearing this term again and again, which is best interest of the child. Everybody is sort of in these cases, the courts, the organizations, the social services, and everybody is always talks about this term, best interest of child, best well, in the interest of welfare of child. But what exactly is best interest and welfare of the child in the situation where two parents are, um, in the situation of a divorce or separation and they're separating?
No, thank you so much,
Yep.
Deepika, for one having me over. And I think it's brilliant that the kind of entire 360-degree coverage that you're trying to get. First, your talk with Pooja, and now me here, and then hopefully you will take this forward with other such people and other such stakeholders also. But coming back to your question, I think if you were to just go and take in a room full of 100 people and ask them what is best interests and welfare of the child, you'll get 300 different opinions, right?
Yeah.
Because each one has their own bias, has their own way of looking at it. So today, I thought, let me just not talk about opinions at all, and we should just talk about what are the facts which are available, right? At the end of the day. So if we were to look at the end of the day, there are four key stakeholders who are involved in something like this. The most important person is, of course, the child, right? But then there is also the parent, the judiciary, and the society, because finally it should all come down to greater good, right? So really, let's start with the most important person, which is the child, that what is really in the best interest and welfare of the child, right? Now, the best way to look at it would be, let's start looking at it over about 20 years. Let's follow a child who's gone through a divorce, parents, and let's start looking at that child and saying, how do those children's outcomes come across, right? How do they actually fare? Whether it should be in shared parenting, joint custody, sole custody with the father, sole custody with the mother. It could be all various kinds of combinations, right?
Right.
Fortunately, we have now almost 2.5 lakh children who've been studied very extensively for
Sorry, what's that
multiple
number?
years. 2.5 lakh, 250,000 children, right?
It is across the world or?
Across the world, 14 different countries by 100 different researchers across the world.
Okay.
So now they also looked at every aspect. They looked at, why don't we look at academic achievements, psychological outcomes, how does their physical health fare, right? And they also looked at, what happens in a case where there is huge amount of parental conflict. It's used, the three most common things that they use is used by an acronym known as PIC, right? PIC, so to say. P stands for the two parents may have very different parenting styles. There could be, one could be an authoritative parent, the other could be a far more permissive parent, so that will the child get confused? There could be a lot of difference. The I stands for income levels. One is relatively poor, the other is relatively rich, right? So there could be a difference in the way the child is coming from. The third is there is a huge amount of conflict. That is the C of that, right? So they looked at all of these factors over 20 different years, and they were unanimous. All 60 studies were unanimous. Shared parenting produces the best outcomes in all cases. But what is shared parenting mean, right? That is the most important thing. So shared parenting means, number one, at least 35% of the child's time should go with either parent, right? Anything above 35% constitutes shared parenting, right? So that's one. Second is, in the eyes of the child, both the parents have equal authority for decision making, right? So as long as these two parameters are satisfied, right, the children's outcomes are the best. But let's go take it one step ahead. 110 of the world's best known researchers, and I'm talking about somebody like, let's say, Dr. Richard Warshak, right? Now, he is the official appointee by the White House, that is the president of the US, for consulting on all such child custody matters. He's been appointed by the Supreme Court of California to be the amicus curiae in such cases. He's quoted by parliaments across the world, right? So all of them, he brought 110 of these world's most famous psychiatrists, psychologists, family therapists, sociologists, all together. And they all looked at it, what constitutes the best interests of the child. They looked at every research that has ever been done. The answer was again unanimous. They were saying two things. Number one, as long as there is no physical violence against the child, right? Proven physical violence. shared parenting is the answer for all children if you want the best outcomes. Number one. And number two, it should be instituted as early as when a child is just 2 years of age, right? Now, a lot of us feel that, one parent cannot take care of the child overnight. But they say no, completely they should be. Why don't we actually even go ahead? See, we as a country in India are still economically and socially a little behind a lot of these Western nations who've actually gone through this phenomena of divorce from far more years than we have, right? So a country like Sweden, let's just look at it, right? They study each and every child every year through what is known as the Kids Screen 52. So that is known as the Elvis Project, right? Which they have. So there's the world's most famous institute called as the Karolinska Institute. They compiled this data for 1.5 lakh children. And they said one thing very simple and straight, right? That children who are in intact families obviously perform the best, right? However, the children who are in shared parenting are not far behind. They're almost the same, right? Maybe about 5% behind or about 7% behind. I mean, the exact numbers are not 5 or 7%. It's difficult to quantify, but yes, right? And lastly, they said, what we call as Santa parenting, which is what is prevalent in India today, which is 4 se 8 ghante, 4 to 8 hours a week, meet with the child, sometimes in a visitation room or such. That is actually counterproductive and produces the worst kind of results in children, which are far, far inferior. Right? So if you look at research from across the world, now there is absolutely no doubt in the minds of any person. The last thing I want to say on this is let's look at the most important thing. They all say, let's ask the children, right? What do the children want, right?
Right.
So close to about 4,000 children were asked this question, right? Among the ones who were in a shared parenting arrangement, so the best time to ask them is, let's say, after they've practiced some kind of divorce for 5-7 years, has gone through, and now they've got to. So children in shared parenting expressed, 90% of them expressed immense satisfaction with their parenting time arrangement. But the children who were in that sole custody or Santa parenting arrangement, no more than 30% expressed satisfaction. Most of them wanted greater time with their non-custodial parents, so to speak. So from every angle, whether it's on the child's psychological health, emotional health, physical health, and most importantly, what the child wants also, this is shared parenting is finally the answer. Right? Again, the other stakeholder which I want to really talk about is the judiciary. Judiciary is also very important. Today, we feel the judiciary, there is the greatest amount of dissatisfaction, I believe, in India today with judiciary, specifically with the family courts, right? There are two major reasons, I believe, for it. One is, of course, immense delays, right? And the second is there is a perceived bias against a certain gender, that is, which is there, right? Now, how can this shared parenting actually help the judiciary is where I'm coming from. So Oklahoma State instituted rebuttable presumption of shared parenting just 2 years back, right? In exactly 1 year itself, the number of cases filed in family court came down by 11%, which means lesser caseload, lesser amount of delays which happen, right?
Sorry, I think you'll have to explain it to the viewers on what exactly does it mean when you say rebuttal presumption of shared parenting?
Yeah. So what rebuttable presumption of shared parenting means is that as soon as a couple which is wishing to divorce or separate walks into a family court, it is the onus on the person who rejects or opposes shared parenting, which is 35% of the time, to prove why not shared parenting. This is, a simple law of innocence until proven guilty. So you can,
all right.
but
the default now is shared parenting. If you don't want it, then you'll have to prove why not.
Why not? Absolutely. Right?
Okay.
So that's that. So the moment that was as a law passed in this place, the number of cases came down. Similarly, the same law was passed in Australia way back in 2005. I think you're aware of
Mhm.
that, right? So in 2005, so in about 2010, the Australian Institute of Family Studies interviewed 7,700 parents and asked them, what is your satisfaction level? Right?
Mhm.
Their satisfaction level, 90% plus were highly satisfied with the judiciary and their parenting
Okay.
arrangement. Right?
Okay.
So the judiciary also benefits by bringing in this default of shared parenting.
Mhm.
Right? So, and
All
plus
right.
the society, of course, I think that's something which we don't even need to discuss about, because we all know there is a lot of data which is floating around which says
Mhm.
that children coming about from single parents are 7 times more likely to commit suicide,
Right.
7 times more likely to, sorry, 15 times more likely to end up in prisons or as a drug addict.
Sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Kapoor, but this is one area which I want to actually bring it up
Sure.
a little later in the discussion and completely focus on this question and not just have it as a passing comment. I want to ask you in very detail on the harmful consequences when it things like this doesn't happen. But before that, so we understood, of course, various things that are to be kept in mind when it comes to best welfare of the child and the researchers across the world as well. Now, one of the main concerns that a lot of people have, uh, and which is, kind of uh, to look at it, maybe it is, okay, fine, chalta hai kind of attitude, but a lot of people think ki, okay, if one parent is really good and, the both the individuals are of course different people, but then uh, more than maximum situations it's like एक अच्छा इंसान है एक इतना ज्यादा अच्छा इंसान नहीं है and so whether it's father or mother it could be either because usually the blame tends to go on to one, right? Either the it's the husband who's bad, that's why the marriage is breaking, or the wife who's bad, that's why the marriage is breaking, and there's a perception on who's a good human being amongst that. And if the child ends up with the parent who is considered to be the good human being, and actually that person takes care, either the father the mother takes really good care of the child, people think कि यार मतलब बार बार फोर्स करना है बच्चे को दूसरे पेरेंट के साथ रहने के लिए, तो क्यों जबरदस्ती करनी है, बिकॉज वन पेरेंट इज टेकिंग गुड केयर, आपको क्या चाहिए बच्चा अच्छी तरह से बड़ा हो. This is a stereotype that is scarily prevalent everywhere, and because of these preconceived notions, people always tend to think ki, हाँ, if one parent is good and taking care of the child nicely, taking care of all the responsibilities, it is fine. Let's not even talk about shared parenting. So uh, what do you have to say about that? uh, is it right, is it wrong, and what are the, if you could say, what are these myths around this perception that you would probably want to burst today?
Sure. No, I think that's a very good question, and it's a very fair question, right? So now let's look at it. The child. Okay. So the child is living with just one parent, right? That is what you're saying, and that parent is taking very good care of the child, right?
Right.
Why not just allow that child to be with that one parent, right? Now,
Yeah.
the simple answer to that is there is a very simple reason why a child has been provided with two parents, right? Both the parents bring in a very different kind of okay, so I would encourage each one. They bring in a very different kind of, what do you say, characteristics or values or systems or traits that a child needs to pick up, right? So let me give you an example right here. So the best way to look at it would be, so there was this study done of children who were growing up with just single fathers versus children who were growing up with just single mothers. right? So what is the
Right.
difference in them? Because see, that's the best way to be able to come to an answer with saying, why does a child need both kinds of parents? So the children who were growing up with just single fathers had greater amount of a better amount of academic achievements. Children who were growing up with single fathers had better terms of independence. They had greater discipline. Overall,
Okay.
the outcomes which were growing out between the single fathers and the single mothers was almost the same, right? But on certain areas, the children who were growing up with single fathers performed far superior. And in certain areas where children growing up with single mothers performed far superior, right? Therefore, is the need for. Now, I actually want to talk about, so I don't know if you've ever heard about what is known as the ACE study or the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. Have you
No.
have so now what happened was, so approximately this is about a 30-year-old study which went on for a very long time. And they found that
Mhm.
there were these 10 adverse experiences that if a child goes through, right? The amount of depression, suicide, the amount of what do you say, anxiety disorders and mental health disorders, we always knew were going to be higher if you go through the number of childhood adverse experiences. But what we were able to see was that even the cause of your heart attack, the cause of your cancer, the cause of bone disease, liver disease, asthma, emphysema, lung diseases, they can all be traced back right down to your childhood experiences. More the number of childhood experiences, adverse experiences that you have, right, the greater the chances. In fact, people would die approximately 20 years earlier if they had more than 7 of these childhood experiences. And they were able to club them into 10 categories. And do you know which was
Mhm.
one of those categories? Loss of a parent. So even if
Mm.
you lose one parent, you are being put into a lifelong handicap.
Right.
So does that answer your question of why I believe that child needs both parents? Because one, they bring in great.
Absolutely.
Please go ahead.
And while I was just listening to you, there were some thoughts going on in my mind. All right, although I was absolutely listening to you, but mind always imagines some things when it's listening.
Yeah,
So I was
sure.
just thinking that when we make a pot, or when we make a house or anything, it's not that we can let go of one ingredient because another ingredient is there, because each and every ingredient brings its own properties and values and strength and everything. So just because one material is extremely good, it doesn't mean that the other material can just let go by, because otherwise the product that we are making basically is incomplete. It's not complete. And but we don't look at it in the same way when we are talking of a human being. But at the same time, एक बच्चे को भी हम एक पौधे की तरह ही बड़ा करते हैं, तो it needs all the ingredients and nutrition and all the properties from both the parents, the good from both the parents. So it was just going on in my mind, and I think it's so beautiful if people actually look at that way, that both the parents bring in very different properties, very different values, very different strengths and traits to a child. And rather than depriving the child of one of the traits, why not have all the traits together? So
I
one
think
of
I
the
love the
most
example
important
that you gave.
questions,
Yeah.
sorry.
I said I love the example that you gave. In fact, a beautiful thought that came to my mind was imagine a tree, right? Imagine a tree's
Yeah,
half the roots are being completely taken away, right?
good.
That is what a
Yeah,
child is all
it
about.
won't
Imagine
grow.
you're saying, I have the right hand, so I don't need a left hand. That's how it
Correct,
works.
absolutely.
Perfect. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So, one of the reasons I eventually am doing these sessions is because invariably, a lot of times, the parent who is on the receiving end are of parental alienation are fathers, and this is a phenomena I think across the world. And the argument that a lot of people give is that fathers are not really involved in the rearing of the child. It's the mother, which is the main guardian, which is the main parent who takes care of, the food of the child, of the, day-to-day requirements of the child and everything. So the larger perspective is still, even though we are in 21st century, is that fathers are not really there for the child. So why even talk about shared parenting? Because if a father is a negligent father, then why would we even talk about, having some access or visitation or whatever? What is this myth, and what is the reality when we talk about fathers being involved in a child's life?
No, that's like, on a lighter note, can women be good drivers? Can men be great chefs?
Of course.
So, absolutely, right? So, I think these are all gender stereotypes that we're all being burdened with, right? However, as I promised
Agreed.
you earlier, yeah, I promised you earlier, no opinions here. I'm going to give you facts, right? So, the answer comes from
Right.
facts. So, one of the most interesting things from a medical, I'll come from this thing, but from a medical perspective is, right? We all understand that when a mother has a child in her womb, she goes through certain amount of hormonal changes, right? I mean,
Right.
they are the estrogen and the progesterone and the prolactin levels, but I won't get too technical. They all go through a different shift, right?
Yeah.
But one of the hormones that is imagined is that of a father, which is blamed a lot, is testosterone, right? Testosterone is considered that it brings in a lot of aggression and it does that, which is true, right?
Yeah.
Now, yeah, which is true. But that was evolutionarily provided to men so that they could be more competitive, so that they could survive, they could be protectors, right? But one of the most interesting things, as soon as a father
Correct.
becomes a father or holds a baby, do you know the testosterone levels decrease by less than half in a man's body just by holding the child or knowing that he's
Oh,
going to be a
really?
father? Absolutely.
Wow.
Right? So imagine a
Didn't know
mother
about
has
that.
in a womb, but the father is at a distance, and yet the hormonal changes are happening at a distance. We undervalue the beauty of the human machine and nature, right?
Yeah.
Nature has provided for all those factors which are there. But let me come to the more directly answering your question. Let's come down to India. So everybody says, so we all understand that the fathers are fully capable of taking care of their child, right? And
Absolutely.
taking as good a care of their child. But now is the question of willingness. Are they willing to do it? Can they do the tasks? So, we did one survey and Flipkart, which is obviously a well known e commerce website, right? So, they did one survey and the results were absolutely brilliant. And this is India based. So, Flipkart did its survey on 1,700 fathers across 17 cities in India, right?
Mm-hmm.
59% of the fathers actually change and dress up the child for school. 40% of the fathers, right, drop their children to school. 40% of the fathers cook meals for their kids. 80% of
Wow.
the fathers are very, very directly involved in school activities. We actually did one of the surveys where we went to 6 schools across Delhi, right? And we looked at, so over the last 10 years, the number of fathers who are attending PTMs has gone up by 4.5 times, right?
Wow.
So
Okay.
approximately about 20% of the fathers were attending PTMs. Now almost 80% of the fathers are attending PTMs, and they are helping
Wow.
children during. Yeah. Why go? So one of the most common issues that people face with fathers is, will they change diapers of a young child, right? Again, a survey was done in as 2016, right? 97% of fathers have changed the diapers of their kids regularly. 97%. Right? So this is again a myth that we are being perpetuated with, that one, either the fathers are incapable of taking care of kids, or more importantly, that they're not willing to take care of the kids, right? The problem that comes is, let me now come to the most important data point, which will actually shock you, right? And which is where the problem lies. Of the survey done by Flipkart, 50% of the fathers wanted to be stay-at-home dads.
Wow. Okay.
The problem is, will the society allow them to be?
Absolutely not.
Exactly my point.
Not at
Now, that is where the problem begins, because the fathers are not allowed to express this feeling or their love and care for their child, right? And this is a data
all.
point which you cannot doubt against, right? If 50% want to be stay-at-home dads, give them the permission to do so. Don't put the social taboos there. Just try and
Right.
imagine. I mean, just, this was a real life experiment. I think you're aware of it, which was done in Australia. Just try and imagine this was done in a club swimming pool. A man goes and wants to play with a child, right? There is so there are about 5, 6 year old children who are in the swimming pool. A man wants to go and play with the child. That man was shunned away by almost 60% of the mothers and the fathers who were there. Similarly, but when a woman was wanted to go and play with the child, a strange child, right? Not one person shunned them away. Now that if that is the kind of stereotypes that you're going to generate in fathers and our boys, finally the losses of the society. Obviously, the losses
Right.
of that child, but finally the losses of that society. So,
Right.
you know, that's the biggest problem, and especially in
I think
separation. I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
until now, I think even the whole idea of fathers getting paternal leaves is also so unheard of, and there are hardly any organization who give fathers any leaves during childbirth. So, when you're yourself perpetuating this idea that, a husband doesn't need to, or a father doesn't need to be there when the child is born, and he doesn't need any leave, so that, then how the hell do you actually expect the father to build a bond? Because building any bond takes time. So and it's when you think that time is not needed, then how will it even happen? But now I think there have been some talks even at the lawmaking level, that, or even the corporate circuit, a lot of KPMG I think gives paternal leaves now. There are some organizations that have started giving, like their maternity leaves, their paternity leaves as well. So I'm sure with time, probably things will definitely become better. Now, when there's a conflict, Dr. Kapoor, and when this whole sort of divorce, separation, etc., is seeping in, that scenario is seeping in this in the marriage. Uh, First is, what is the responsibility that you think is of the grandparents here? Because India still continues to largely be, sort of a joint family setup, except of course the urban areas. But still, a large number of families stay together. So grandparents are there, and so what responsibility do you think do the grandparents have in such situations where people are at sort of in on the verge of separation? And what is the role of judiciary in such circumstances?
No, I think sale grandparents and sale elders play probably the greatest amount of role here. And I think the most important message that I want to deliver today would be the importance of the first 6 months after separation. Right? The first 6 months after separation is when you can actually, the child will either thrive in life or die in life. And I'm being very literal. It's the first 6 months in the separation which makes all the difference. Why? The first 6 months is when the bitterness between the parents is at its peak. So that is when the harm to the child can come is very, very large, right? Second is that during the first 6 months, the child is most vulnerable, right? Because suddenly, like the example that we discussed about uprooting a tree or making a pot, it is at that point of time what your mitti hai is at its vulnerable worst at that first 6 months period of time. And the parents are not in the right frame of mind because there is bitterness and
Hello?
anger. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, we just lost you in between, but it's fine now.
Sure, wonderful. So, as I said, the child is most vulnerable, and the bitterness and anger between the parents is at its peak, right?
Right.
So, the first 6 months is what makes all the difference. So, it is at this point of time that number one, the grandparents, or whether it is the courts, I look at both of them in the similar vein, right? Needs to make it very clear that whether you divorce or you don't divorce is a separate issue, right? But there is no divorce from parenting.
Hmm.
Parents will always remain parents. There is no such divorce. That's a lifelong commitment which has been made, right? Second thing is both the parents, before they even discuss issues like acha saath mein rehna hai, let's try and live together ki nahi, right? Their first goal should be how do we ensure that there is a parenting plan which is in place for the child, so that there is both the parents understand that there is all the other issues can be discussed as a second step. The first has to be the child, right? And
Right.
how the time sharing between the child takes place. Now, if one of the parents opposes it or has a problem and things like that, I'm very happy if they should use marriage counselors, right? However, if marriage counselors are also not able to get both the parents to see light with each other, right, and cooperate, then I think there is only first step, which is that the courts, the judges, or the grandparents must step in and create a very detailed parenting plan which says from this time to this time the child is going to be with him, or this time to this time the child is going to be with her. This is the kind of, okay, so you, why don't you pay for the school fees, why don't you take care of this? So there is a complete allocation of responsibilities which needs to be done, right? I think that was the step which so there is a wonderful organization, Child Rights Foundation, which made these child access and custody guidelines, which have been approved by 5 of the courts which are there, right? 5 high courts across. They needs to be followed, but they prescribe what is the minimum. I repeat, the minimum time sharing. Let's get started with that, and then slowly we can increase it immediately, right? So the only thing that they must understand is number one, child is number one. Second, during separation, it is a medical emergency. It is a serious medical emergency. As we go along, you will find out that that is what decides the child's whole future. And children, as we understand, is our society and our future in our country, right? So the future of your country is being decided in those first 6 months of with you of separation. It's a medical
Right.
emergency. Look at it like that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very, very important thing to say, because once that phase has passed, the
Yeah.
scars that are going to be there, I mean, if I was just thinking, sometimes we become so selfish. Um, we take years and years for, a small bad experience that happens to us. It takes years and years for us adults to forget that. And imagine the kind of, repetitive scars that you are, putting on the child's mind or heart in that very vulnerable age, in the initial days. I'm sure it would be very difficult for any kid to come out of that. Um, I mean, I also have certain memories of my childhood which I would not want to discuss, but there have been situations like this in my family as well, and those incidents and then those moments have actually stuck by me. Those conversations, and those very innocent answers that kids give, but they stay with them for the rest of their lives, and of course it shapes them. So yeah, I think it's the onus is more on the grandparents and both the parents. Most important are those two individuals and everybody around them to actually ensure that whatever is happening, the child is at best tried to stay out of it. And try to make a conducive environment as much as possible. Dr.
No, the
Kapoor, what is
brain
parental
architecture
alienation?
itself is altered. The child's architecture is itself altered, which can take a lifelong for the child to heal from, like you rightly mentioned,
Correct.
right? So those 6 months is an actual medical emergency. Look at it like a heart attack for a child and treat it
Hmm.
like that. Yeah,
Right.
sure. So, right.
What is this phenomena called parental alienation, and what is alienation? How do people do it? What kind of activities that a certain parent does, which qualifies that parent as an alienator?
Okay, so let me actually go back to my first exposure to parental alienation, and let me tell you this story, and that would actually help illustrate what it is, right? So this happened approximately 10 years back, and that was the first time I was exposed to it. So I had gone to meet this teacher friend of mine about 10 years back in school, and that day there was also a PTM which was there of that school, right? And suddenly I see this father walk in with the child, and it was about an 8-year-old girl. And that 8-year-old girl suddenly just snatched her hand away from the father and ran shouting, "Dad, I hate you." Both me and the teacher was absolutely shocked. We had no clue what's happening. So I just looked at this friend of mine, the teacher, and I asked, "What happened?" And the teacher was like, "I don't know, but just still about 6 months back, these two people, that is the child and the father, used to come to attend PTMs, and they used to be always giggly, happy, and they were this thing." So I was like, "What happened?" Suddenly, the first thought that struck to my mind at that point of time was, I'm sure the father would have done something wrong to the daughter. There was something that the father would have done which would have caused it, and things like that. So we, both me and the teacher, went in a very tense tone and spoke to the father, and I said, "What is it that you're talking about?" Right? So he just said he was equally embarrassed. You can imagine the state of the father at that time when this is happening in the school, and he was equally embarrassed. And he just said, "I have no clue, because but only thing I can say is I'm going through divorce, a very ugly one, for the last 6 months, and I've met my daughter for the first time today after 3 months. But since it was her PTM, I brought her, right?" Now, we were still not convinced, right? So to cut a long story short, the teacher obviously went through this whole process. And that's when we realized that in this case, the mother, obviously parental alienation is done by both the mother and the father. It is basically completely gender neutral. But in this case, it was the mother, had been poisoning the mind of the child against the father and saying that unless you do this, that is, you run away from your father and you reject your father, you will not be able to enter back into the house, right? Now, that is quintessentially what is parental alienation, right? Now, parental alienation typically, we believe, is done by three different kind of people. I'll probably go through the whole process with you of how it actually happens, because that is something that would really work with you. So this will take a little time for me to explain to you, right? But typically, parental alienation happens because of two major reasons that must be fulfilled. Two basic reasons: isolation and fear, right? So I'll give you another. So, 20 years back, I just passed out of medical college, and I had 3 months to kill, right? So I took up a job as a part-time doctor in Tihar jail in Delhi, right over here, right? Now, in those 3 months, there was only one thing that I learned, right? That for a price of a beedi, you can get the most hardened criminal to do anything that they want for a price of a beedi, right? That is what happens inside Tihar jail because of two reasons: isolation. The isolation doesn't have to be complete, just functional. After all, even the inmates are allowed to meet their family and friends, right? But, and the second is the fear of retribution, that if they don't do it, all their privileges will be completely blocked, right? It is the
Hmm.
same process which makes parental alienation possible. So let's go through it, right? So the first step that any alienating parent would do would be, how do I create a fear of retribution in the mind of a child, right? So the first thing is, let's say the child comes back from after visiting with the targeted parent, that is the parent against whom, right? All the mother or the father or the alienating parent has to do is, so how was it? If the child even says that it was fun, right? All that the person has to do is give a stern look. Oh, really? So you think you had fun? And after that, nobody talks to the child for 2 to 3 hours. And the child has got the message that if I have fun with this parent, I am in a lot of trouble. It is, I am not allowed to have fun. So there is the first seed of fear of retribution which has been sown, right? Now comes the next step, that you start creating fear in the mind of the child of the targeted parent. So one of the examples that I quote a lot is, and which is a very sad example. This was, I still remember the date, 7th January 2012, right? Is when I first saw this thing actually happening in front of my eyes and I heard this, right? So there was this father who had brought this child who was just a 4-year-old child to the zoo, right? Because the child was very, very fond of animals in general, right? As soon as the child entered inside the zoo, right, the child was anxious, scared, was like this absolute. I mean, she seemed like a ghost. The father on his side tried everything to cheer up, to talk about animals, didn't help. But he said, fine, let me just get out of the zoo, maybe some other day. Maybe the child is in a bad mood, right? But
Yeah.
as soon as he stepped out of the zoo, the child was again the playful self, happy. She was cheerful. She was like this thing. Father, like you and me, were shocked. What happened, right? So the child told his father that Mama and Nani had told me that you will take me to the jungle and feed me to the tigers. So for a child, that a zoo is a jungle, right? And anything that the mother has said, the child, so now the fear of the child. Let me give you another example, right? Hello, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the next thing that happened in this case was that the child was told, you remember that cake on your birthday that your papa had brought? Right? That cake was poisoned. I had to save you. So now the child has started fearing that
What
parent or the
kind of
parent.
what kind of abnormal people do this? I'm sorry to say this, but this is so abnormal. I mean,
I will come to that. I'll come to that. That is something which you would actually realize it's a mental health disorder, which we will absolutely discuss, and I would really like to talk about that. Right now, just hold on to that question, because now the fear of retribution is there, and the fear of the targeted parent is there. Now, all you need to do is, the next step is isolation, where our judiciary happily helps the alienating parent, right? Because if you remember, I told you, you don't need to completely isolate. You just need functional isolation. So typically, what does our judiciary do? 4 से 8 घंटे meet the child for 4 to 8 hours in a week or in 2 weeks, and that's good enough, right? That's as good as functional isolation of the child. And those also can be easily bypassed by coming up with stupid excuses and lies. The child is sick. Or what is one of the favorites of the alienating parent is, what they will do is they will position an event like a movie or a outing or something that the child is interested in just at the time when that parent is supposed to pick up the child, right? Now what happens, the child himself or herself starts saying, I don't want to go, right?
yeah,
And that is when the alienation has been completely completed, which is what now starts what is known as the independent thinker phenomena. which means the child is scared of the parent, and the child starts believing, I don't want to go. And that's when
Mm.
it becomes a Herculean task, right? And that's where our judiciary, psychologists, and parents give up and say the end. But I love the question which you asked me was, what kind of a parent does this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are three kinds of parents who do this, right? So one is who are known as the naive ones, right? So they
Mm.
are even people like you and me, even in intact marriages, who are, you would have seen this even in your marriage, a parent, let's say a father saying to a child, your mother is mad. She forever keeps fighting, right? Now that causes harm to the child, but the mother is doing, or the father is doing this not out of ill will but just anger, and
Mm.
typically he regrets it after a point of time, right? And it's so that's the naive one, right? The second is the avenger ones, right? Now, Avenger ones are the ones who do this in the first 1 year of marriage, or after separation, sorry, first 1 year or 2 years after separations, right? Because of anger. There is a feeling of revenge, right? And they can be very nasty, but typically they last for typically about 1 year maximum. And if there is a threat of court sanctions or sanctions by the grandparents, they typically slowly go to co-parenting and become normal. But unfortunately, the third are the pathological, and almost about 50% of these parents who do this alienation are what are known as pathological. They suffer from what is known as cluster B personality disorder. That consists of either narcissistic personality or borderline personality disorder. And those are the most dangerous. For them, it is not about the child, it's a well recognized mental disorder. They are unable to even generate empathy or any such kind of feeling for the child. For them, the child is not important. And unfortunately, that is why I say it's a very, very severe emergency, is that parents like this, it is now a documented fact among all the disorders, mental health disorders which are there on this planet. Borderline personality disorder, a parent having borderline personality disorder produces the worst outcomes in the child of all the mental health disorders, right?
I know
so
cases like that actually.
So that's why I'm
Yeah.
saying this is the greatest blunder that we do, is considering that, oh, this is a mother father fight which is happening, a tussle which is happening. No, this is an issue of serious child abuse we are dealing with. We are dealing with a very severe form of child abuse. Countries across the world have criminalized this into an offense. It's a criminal offense for which parents can be put into jail, and they have been put into jail. And out here
Not
in
in India.
India, we're still not even at a birth or a toddler stage. We are still starting off.
Dr. Kapoor, I remember when I'm talking to you, one case that I'm just continuously remembering again and again is the case of Syed Ahmed Makhdoom. His story is the first story in Martyrs of Marriage, my documentary on dowry law misuse. And the major reason behind he committing suicide was exactly this absolutely abnormal behavior where the wife had instilled into that little boy's mind that the place where Sayed was staying, whenever they used to cross it and the kid would scream papa papa baba baba, and that my papa stays here, so why don't you take me here? And she
Hmm.
used to say, yeah, Habu rehta, and Habu is a demon. So,
Yeah.
so she would tell ki, this is not Papa's house, this is demon's house, or demon's house mein nahi jana hai. So the child slowly started believing that this is not his father's house, but it's the demon's house. And since Makhdoom would barely, get any chance to meet his son, eventually all of this brainwashing and the kind of things that he used to hear, sometimes, just sometimes when his kid would eventually come during his visitation with him, the kid would tell that, Nani said this, and Mama ne to bola ki aapke ghar mein to habu hai. Once I still remember, Nausheen Makhdoom's sister telling me that, I was with Makhdoom at that time, he was alive, and his son came to, visit them after fighting a lot for, some access. And he says, as soon as he entered the house, he was like, "Habu ka hai? Habu ka hai? Is ghar mein to habu hai na? Habu ka hai?" So, I felt just so bad, and yeah. But here's a question, Dr. Kapoor. Now, let's keep judiciary aside, because everything is not possible to be done by court. Uh, Mental health issues or mental disorders are anyways least spoken about, least accepted, least acknowledged, and sort of have a very negative connotation in the society, right? Pagal bolte hain hum log, and that person is forever, taken out. We don't usually consider these as traits which can be worked upon, which can be healed, which can be treated. We just shun the other person and just say ki ye to pagal hai, whatever. And that's why even if somebody is exhibiting those kind of traits, people would not point them out, thinking कि माँ है या बाप है तो सही ही सोचेगा, बच्चे के लिए गलत गलत नहीं सोच सकता. And these individuals also, I would like to believe that there are a lot of these people who do this, but they don't even realize that they have some kind of a disorder. So what's the solution? Like, how does one gauge that somebody has this kind of disorder, put the red flags out and do something about that situation?
No, so I think you very rightly mentioned. So obviously, I won't go into the most obvious parts, which is to say, raising issues about mental health awareness and talking a lot more about it is something that all of us realize we need to do, right?
Yeah.
Uh, to put it into perspective, just the two diseases that I spoke about, the narcissistic personality and the borderline personality disorder. So in the general population, 2% of the population has it, right? But in family court scenario, it's almost 10% who have it, right? So because these two disorders are the most common reasons why which divorces and these problems obviously happen. So there is
Right.
no easy answer to say that can we, other than actually raising a lot more of awareness, is one this thing. But even before we raise awareness within the society, it is educated people like, let's say, you and me. We need to be aware. Our lawyers and judges need to be aware about such issues, right? Because till
Right.
the first port of call is still going to be the family courts, right? Now,
Correct.
so let's just say, even if, let's say, tomorrow you get married and you're living with a person who probably has this mental health disorder, you're at a great position right now to be able to appreciate that and take the person for help to a psychologist and a psychiatrist and do that. But the unfortunate part with these two disorders, and specifically borderline personality disorders, is that they, under no circumstance, believe that they have the problem. They believe
Hmm.
everybody has the problem.
Right. Yeah.
So that is where the first. So that is why the courts across the world have started using this term, which is now known as therapeutic jurisdiction, right?
Okay.
So what we're
Okay.
saying is that in the family court scenario, right? Because that is the first port of call which is going to happen in these kind of situations, and the child is at great risk here. And number three, the most important part, that it is the lawyers and the judges, not the lawyers, sorry, the judges who have some amount of authority which is available to them, right? Because finally, there is a fear among all the litigants that the judges could create problems for them. So people tend to listen to them. So therapeutic jurisdiction typically means that the courts have to start taking on the role of a psychologist and a judge simultaneously. How does this happen? How does this happen? So number one, across the world. So if you look at it in countries like UK, there is a body known as CAFCAS, CAFCASS, right? In US, there is a body known as CPS, Child Protective Services. So there are
Right.
these bodies which have got attached to courts, whose job
Right.
is to assist the judges in the psychological evaluation of the parents who are coming to courts, right? Because the child is this thing. Now that is where the solution starts from, right? So typically when a person comes in, the first step that needs to be taken, or let's say the first step at which there is even the hint of alienation which is happening, or a hint of such disorder which is happening, the both the parents need to be sent for psychological counseling immediately. So there is a stepwise step which happens. So as soon as two parents walk in, they are first asked to attend a workshop where they are told about what are the best interests and welfare of the child and blah blah blah, and they're told let's not fight, reconcile if you can, and all of that usual thing, right? The second step is at the first instance itself, they are sent to professional counselors. The third step is that the privileges or rights of that person who does not, who does not comply with the court wishes, right, is are curtailed. Okay, and so let me give you an example. So this was a beautiful judgment I feel given by Justice Kailash Gambhir of Delhi High Court. I loved what
Mm-hmm.
he actually did. Right. So in this case, there was an alienating mother, right? And she had been given two chances, and yet she was doing it. So, he passed a judgment. He says, for the next 1 week, every day you will go for 3 hours to Rajghat and introspect how you are screwing up the life of the child. And he actually
I
positioned
remember this judgment. I remember
huh?
this judgment. Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
I remember this judgment. Yeah.
Right now,
Right,
very
right, right.
similar things can be done, like making sure, so one of the things which I personally am in great favor of, send the alienating parent to the orphanages and tell them you will do community service there for, let's say, 1 month in the orphanage, realized
Yeah.
what is happening to the child over there, right? But
Right.
finally, if that also doesn't help, what we have to realize, that person should not be allowed to parent the child. The custody of the child needs to be shifted. And this is not something revolutionary that I'm talking about. I have more than 300 judgments from across the world where the custody of the child has been shifted immediately. Right? See, we have to understand that child is the most important center there. So those are some of the things I feel.
I really hope something is done. Just before I come to what I was saying, do we have anything like a CPS or any of the the social organizations attached with family court right now in India? Do we have any bodies or any organizations working under maybe NCPCR who are assisting the courts in these cases? Do we have anything like that right now?
So we have psychologists who have been attached, right? But unfortunately, my experience of meeting with more than hundreds of them has been, not the psychologists, but the parents, they act more like mediators rather than psychologists, right?
Hmm.
So there is a huge difference between being a mediator and being a psychologist, right? So they are typically people, let's be honest, they're typically people who are on a temporary part-time contractual job attached to the courts, earning about 30, 40,000 rupees per month. They could be just social workers. There is no this thing, there is no qualification required for them to be a psychologist. They could be, right? So that's not there. With NCPCR, we did a huge amount of conference with them, right? So this was in 2017, where we brought in psychiatrists, psychologists. We brought in 9 family court judges from Delhi courts came in, brought in lawyers, everybody to actually sit down. Almost all the family court judges clearly mentioned, we need help. Please provide us with psychologists.
Yeah.
We need help. I mean, they for the first time in closed doors are clearly telling you, please give us help. And NCPCR is what it is. It
No?
refuses. We've been following up with them. The NCPCR, all the judges clearly mentioned that, please give us a protocol of how to manage parental alienation cases. They clearly mentioned that, we see it in our eyes. What do we do about it? Please help us. No, nobody
Hmm.
asked, you know. So the only thing that I tell people is, so let me ask you
I
this
think
question.
just it's very sad, but I remember this case from Pune, and that's what I was bringing. And maybe even the people who are watching, some of them would know it, some of them may. I'm presuming most of them wouldn't know it. That there's a case in Pune where the kid was given given custody. The custody of the kid was with the father for the longest of times, and then the mother had petitioned for the custody, and there was a lady judge who reversed the order, God knows for what. And that kid was a little bit a special kid. He had some issues, but he was a very sweet child and used to adore his father. And the custody was then shifted to the mother, or maybe it was temporarily given to her. I don't know. I don't remember exactly. It's been, I think, 4 5 years now since that case, maybe 4 years, um, where this woman was living with her live-in partner eventually, and she killed the child. She beat up the child so bad that the child was killed. And I remember a lot of men's rights activists at that time, raising their voice, that, this judge really needs to be held accountable, because the shifting had happened just a while back when this murder happened. And we were like, how can the judge not be held responsible for this murder? Because was there absolutely no sense applied that, you are transferring the custody? On just what grounds are you transferring the custody? And, okay, maybe the judge was not directly responsible, but I think there should have been, that case should have gone to NCPCR. This should have been taken up by the authorities. They should have looked into the situations and circumstances, and how, just, in wild imaginations or whatever, I don't know what happened to the judge to just transfer the custody, and then leading to a thing like that. But sadly, even extreme cases like these also don't make these people just stand up and take a look at, that things are going wrong, and they really need to step up and then acknowledge, at least acknowledge.
No,
um,
terrible. I
Sad.
mean, the concept of emotional abuse, and most importantly, so when you do training workshops for the judges, I think that is where, so one of the serious recommendations that has come up, and this is again part of the NCPCR, this thing, is that the judges training and the lawyers training must have a serious element of psychological elements in it. Number one.
Right.
Two, see, I sometimes don't blame the judges completely. I agree they are to blame, but not completely, because, see, in that 5 minutes that they have or time to actually spend per case in a family court, right? What is their ability to be able to gauge the facts and to be able to, so a number of judges whom we spoke to, they said, look, we have no clue about the truth in the matter. There is so much amount of lies and everything. We have absolutely no knowledge about what's happening in the case. We do it on the basis of largely this is something all the judges speak. Therefore, we need to supplement them by having a body which actually assists them in decision making, right? You
Yeah.
cannot expect them to do it just entirely on their own. So a body like Kafka's needs to be there. But the second place where I think a huge difference can be made is the schools, right? Unfortunately, what happens is, see, the child spends almost 30% of his life, his or her life, inside a school. The school environment is something where you can pick up these problems in the child very quickly. But what is happening today is, see, across the world, people are saying academic achievements is not the answer. To achieve academically, see, today, when, let's say, you have a child at home, you only get a report card after class 5 which says maths, English, EVS, science, whatever, those marks. The socio-emotional health is never looked at, is never reported. That is where you can pick up early signs of distress in a child, right? We need to equally hold our schools responsible for saying that when you go and attend a PTM, please tell me what is the score of my child on socio-emotional health. That is what's going to make the difference, because that's when you pick up distress. Then those distresses can actually go to a body like NCPCR or SCPCR, whichever is the case may be, and then the investigations can be done. That's the only way we can save children like the one that you're talking about in Pune. Because, see, a
Right.
parent is in distress and the judges finally cannot always. Those reports from school should reach the courts in case of separation and divorces. There should be a constant maintenance of reports in school. Why shouldn't there be? Right? The teachers can see signs of disruption, signs of withdrawal, physical symptoms. It's a very well defined science which can actually be practiced in schools. Unfortunately, we don't. Right? That's, I think, the other place where we can
Right.
unstick.
I think I think I have covered quite a lot of what I wanted to ask you. Let me just so one of the most important thing, and I think one of the most important twofold question is that I have, which I am going to sort of conclude this with. One is, what would be your advice to the parents who are alienated, or who are, who are unable to have access to the kids and are in the court right now in the process of asking for visitation or access, or some kind of parenting plan, and they are rebuffed by the courts, or they are discouraged by the court? What are some of the resources that you think that these parents must go through to help themselves, to aid themselves with either research or better arguments, or how to present their case well, maybe? And second question is, um, what can they individually do when all the doors are shut from the other parent side?
Correct. No, I think I have the greatest amount of empathy for the targeted parents, right?
Mhm.
Because it is one of the, let me just say it up front, it is going to be the toughest battle they will fight in their entire life. You know, I had one father who had come up to me and said this, it may sound rather crude, but it is actually the truth. He said this very upfront. He says, you know what I went through for almost 5 years? I went through as if my whole was being raped every day while I was watching helplessly, and the courts were actually helping the rapist. Those were his exact words, how he put it across. Because he kept trying to tell the courts, this has happened. It's unfortunate that he had this daughter. She, 9 months back, at the age of 22, committed suicide after being
Gurgaon?
alienated. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Good. Okay. Alienated for almost about 14, 15 years. And those were his words, that he kept trying to show the parent that, or the courts, this is happening, but nobody would listen. Yeah. 22-year-old girl. Anyway, coming back to what the parents can do, right? So the question, right?
Yeah.
So I think one is obviously don't give up, right? It is going to be tough. Don't give up, right? Number one. Number two, I think you need, as I said, it's a tough battle. So you need to first take care of yourself, right? Make sure that you physically and mentally are in good health, right? Go seek help for yourself first. But now coming down to what are the resources. So the most important resource for you will be, even if you're not getting access to the child, you're definitely getting access to schools. So use the schools, right? Go walk in into the schools, go talk to the teacher, get involved in what is happening in the child's life, right? Second, come what may, turn up, right? Turn up whether it is, so there are loads of times that I've seen that the court has given visitation or things like that. However, the other party refuses to allow that to happen and things like that. Turn up there, come what may. So I'll give you an example. So one of the fathers actually won the battle this way. So each time the mother would say that, the child is sick, can't come. The child is sick, can't come, right? He says, fine. If the child is sick, I'll come and see the child at your home for just 10 minutes. So the
Hmm.
poor guy used to travel for almost about 40 kilometers each time, just see the child for 10 minutes and go back, right?
Hmm.
Keep doing that. That's one thing, right?
Hmm.
The second thing is, when you are going to the courts, there is a huge amount of research. The PIL that we have filed, which is available, right, which is available online. My email IDs are probably known to most people of my organization. So all the researches that I've spoken to are just 1/10 or 1/20th of the researches that we have, the judgments that we have, right? Write to us. We'll definitely send you as much as we can. We are in the process of putting it and compiling it on a website so that it
Hmm.
can be freely available and you guys can actually access them completely throughout, right? Some of them are available on the Child Rights Foundation website, but that's also not yet complete. So we're in the process of making that. That should be there. But till the meanwhile, write to us. We'll be happy to send you as much. And so I've sent it to at least 100, parents which are there.
There's a question that immediately, resonates with what we are talking right now. So let me just take this, even though we haven't gone into the queries yet. But uh, so Rahul says, no, the schools refuse to meet. We have to go through the judicial process to ask for involvement even in schools. And I think I have come across various cases where exactly what Rahul says is happening, where, of course, my exposure majorly remains to cases where it's the father who is struggling to get access to the child. So there have been several fathers who have come to me and told me that the school doesn't allow them any involvement whatsoever. They say bring the court orders, or your wife has completely, um, sort of threatened us that dare we, allow any kind of information or pass on any kind of information or things to you, and she's gonna, take actions against us, and so they are also very afraid. So, what can be done if situation is like that? Go back to the court, or what can be done?
See, obviously, school is a huge area where a large information should flow in. But I agree with you that there are certain schools who have taken a very tough stand against the parent, right? In which case, truthfully, there is really no recourse except for going to courts again at the end of the day, because I don't think it makes any sense in trying to create a scene or create a problem near the school where this is there, or fighting with the schools, because really it's an unfortunate judgment which has been passed by, I think, one of the courts, I'm forgetting which one, which they are misinterpreting and misusing, right? Which is what is there. Truthfully, actually, they should have used. So, if you see articles of the UNCRC, if you see the National Child's Charter for Children of India, right, of 2005, all of them allow free access, right? It's just that They want to create their own problems, which is there. So there is no answer except for one. But if that is also not available to you, right? So if
Mm.
the schools are also out of the gamut of of available information with you, start with emails, start with telephones, whatever time that you are possibly getting. See, look at it, it's just one step at a time. As I said, it's going to be a long battle, right? Start getting educated about mental health disorders and educating the judges. We have done that, so there are certain people who have held judicial education workshops along with the judicial academies, right, where we have educated them about these problems, right? But it's a slow process which is going to take its own time. There is no quick answer to this. So whatever time that you do get with the child, spend it as fruitfully as you can. But yeah, courts are the biggest problem, which is why I keep going back to courts saying, unless we educate our judges, we'll have a huge issue. We will have a huge issue.
All right. I hope things get better. Uh, it can be really overwhelming for people to hear all of this discussion because invariably in the space that we operate on in or I operate in, it's full of helplessness and unfortunately, uh, because of the laws that we have, because of the societal perception that we have, stereotypes we have, or the kind of this whole movement of just siding with one gender, that we have as a prevailing situation right now. Of course, these are tough times. Not just these are tough times. Of course, it's been for years, and but like Dr. Kapoor said, the change will happen only when people come out and fight to, bring the change. Otherwise, it would be the status quo which will remain. I'm sure all these researches that he's talking about that have happened across the world have not happened because one person just stood up and said there needs to be a research like that. It is consistent efforts of thousands and thousands of people, thousands and thousands of alienated mothers, fathers who actually, knocked on the door of the judicial system or the government or the lawmakers or the research organizations. And eventually, these studies did get carried out. इंडिया में अभी तक लोगों को यही शायद समझ में नहीं आ रहा है कि हमारे डिवोर्स रेट्स काफी ज्यादा हो गए हैं. अभी भी लोगों को यही लगता है कि ज्यादातर शादियां तो बहुत सुखमयी बीतती हैं, तो दे डोंट इवन वांट टू लुक एट दीज थिंग्स बिकॉज दिस इज जस्ट समथिंग एक्स्ट्रा व्हिच इज हैपनिंग, व्हिच invariably a lot of people actually blame people for. Divorce is still something that people are blamed for and not really, acknowledged for to be doing so that they can live happily. But yeah, I'm sure slowly and steadily people will realize, and one step at a time, one day at a time. uh, I
No,
think
can I add one quick thing what you just said? So a quick piece.
yeah,
Every year in India, 82,000 children conservatively are alienated and condemned for life. Every year. Do you know how many
sorry,
children are
how many
82,000
every year?
every year are added to what we call as the alienated pool every year, 82,000, right?
And where
And
does
these
this
are
data come from?
these are conservative estimates. This data is part the entire explanation of how this data came about. It comes from the United Nations website of the divorce rates. Unfortunately, our understanding of divorce rates are 2% is what everybody says, right? In India,
Yeah.
right? Actually, they are 16%, right? So if
And
you look at the
I think in urban setups, I think it may have crossed 20-25% as well. It's
in
pretty
urban
high.
setup, it's 30%. In
Yeah, yeah,
urban cities, metro cities like Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, and Bangalore, it's 30%. So
right.
there was an entire calculation which is there. So basis of which the most conservative estimates are 82,000 children which are being alienated every year, right?
Wow.
All I'm going to say is, do you know how many murders happen in India every year?
30,000.
29,000.
Sorry,
29,000. 29,000.
29,000.
Yeah. Do you know how many child trafficking cases happen in India every year?
That would be a
In
high number, I guess.
8,000.
50,000,
8,000.
8,000. Okay,
Between 8 and 9,000, right?
okay.
And we've had a person who's got a Nobel Prize because of working on child trafficking alone, right?
Yeah.
And that is 9,000 only. The other simple figure. So if we are talking about, this is a huge epidemic of a problem, 82,000 cases of just alienated children we are talking about, who are being condemned for life. The problem is, I'll give you this thing. I remember it's about everybody putting together one single. I don't want to actually make it sound in any way bad, but is when you speak to a lot of these parents and fathers who are fighting for this, right? Who want this time. When you ask them to take one step ahead and just write to the Law Commission, I still remember, right? Nobody does that. So unless you fight for your rights, yes, it's quite possible that you may not win it, but you're fighting for the next generation. Finally, the
True.
next generation will get it, right?
True.
And so I think the bigger problem is about most fathers giving up midway.
Right.
That
All
is the
right.
biggest.
So this is I think I'm concluding the discussion with this as my last question to you. Of course, I am pretty sure maybe I'm not aware, but as far as I am informed or aware, I don't think there's any study in India which has perhaps looked into the uh, sort of harmful consequences of a child who has been in a very violent kind of a marriage or separation or divorce, and where the separation has been extremely bitter, and the child is with one parent, or the how adversely this kind of alienation impacts. So if you can just conclude the discussion, Dr. Kapoor, with what are the harmful consequences that researchers have found this kind of alienation or this kind of division, or just breaking up the child has on children, and what does the research say, what are the kind of things that have been discovered that these kids usually get into because of all that they're exposed to? If you could share something on that. Do we have any research like that in India, where any research that has assessed?
Yes, so we do have research on the impact of just plain divorce on children, which is available for in India. We have data on what amount of mental health disorders are there, and what percentage of them get divorced and things like that. We have research on the impact of the child, but parental alienation per se, there is one paper which is probably getting published probably in the next 6 months or so from a university in Indore, right? So there is a researcher, and there is another person from Bangalore, another lady who herself was alienated and a psychologist. So she's doing a research on that. So that will probably take another year. So apart from that, there is no such Indian research which is available, right? However, international research, a large amount. So the most popular research which is there is of Dr. Amy Baker. Okay, so she has done a lot of research of. She was very lucky enough to get a number of adult children who were alienated as kids, right? And then interview them because to see actually what impact it happened. So a couple of things which absolutely are very clear. So there is 100% that their rates of depression go up approximately 3 times. Anxiety
Mm,
disorders go up about 4 to 5 times. Uh, the suicidal rate in them goes up approximately 6 times. Substance abuse and alcoholism goes up hugely. I don't remember the exact figure how much, but that goes up hugely, alcoholism and substance abuse. But most importantly, the study which I shared with you of the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. Now, that has been replicated across all over the world. It started
okay.
from US by a gentleman known as Dr. Vincent Felitti, okay? But it's now even CDC has taken it up. CDC is like the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in India, right? So that's something like CDC in the US, right? Center for Disease Control, right? So they work with ministry. So it has been replicated in Ireland, Scotland, in India. They are doing research on this and all of that. So those parental alienation per se leads to 10 to 15 years decrease in your life expectancy because of increased risk of heart attack, of increased risk of cancer, of increased risk of bone disease. Most importantly, lastly, WHO by itself has recognized this in their international classification of diseases, and which is going to be, so it has just got recognized about 6 months back, and they have
Oh,
now made it into a disorder,
oh, okay.
right? And it
I'm
is
glad
part of,
there is some research happening on this across the world. I hope people in India also wake up to these researches. But I'm sure the people who are in this space, I think, do keep a tab on it, whatever is happening across the world.
no, so that's this. So WHO is now woken up to it. American Psychological Association has included it in their DSM-5. Uh, the courts across the world have recognized it. It's all there. But it's the question of now taking it to the next step, and which is to disseminating that information,
Right.
educating our psychologists and educating our judges and lawyers, because unfortunately this problem cannot be dealt just by medical professionals alone. This requires the legal professionals to be a part of it.
Right. All right. I will conclude the discussion. Just one last quick thing, if you could say, because we've been there for 1 hour, 35 minutes already, Dr. Kapoor. So, one very quick, message to people who think this is not a big thing, you know, individuals who think that they are just right in whatever they are doing by denying a parent the love and the care of a child and allowing them to be a part of their child's life just because that person, I mean, whether the husband who is doing this to a wife or doing this to a husband, people who don't see any wrong in this, what would be a message to such people?
The only thing I'll simply say is that finally they have to just realize they are in the end harming their own child. They are killing their own child. It's their blood, it's their child which they are killing, right? Um, Fight as much as you like with your husband or your wife, right? Keep the child out of it. That's all I can say. Really, because see, there is no words. I've looked for those magical words which would change the mind of a alienating parent, right? Um, I don't think there is any. And there is absolutely no shame and no stigma attached to going and seeking mental health help. Your life will become much more beautiful. Go seek help. And I'm saying this to a lot of alienating parents. I understand your anger, your bitterness, you feeling you're right. Okay, why don't you go and seek that help for some time? Meet a psychologist, understand it. Your life will improve. It's not some anybody else's. People who walk out of psychologists' offices always say it is our life which has become better. I'm a happier person. The burden of lies is terrible.
Right. And I think, since I've been in this space for the last 7, 8 years, and I still remember, I'm sure that I would have that screenshot somewhere. I remember a guy who uh, dropped a comment in one of the discussions on this. So since I have been in this space, this is a constant request to me to work on this issue in form of a documentary, or bring out these focus my filmmaking work a little bit on this side as well, because in
You
all my
must.
documentary screenings across India, even outside abroad, there have been fathers who have not been a part of their child's life because of, and they're suffering this. Of course, they have false accusations and other cases going on. But a lot of people have requested me, and I remember I had shared something on this, and there's this guy who dropped a comment which I never forget, and he said that thank you for talking about this because my mother alienated me from my dad, and for the longest of my time, for the longest of time in my life, I used to think it is my father who's the culprit. But eventually, her obsession and her paranoia started impacting my life too, and adversely. And that's when I started seeing things that I was ignoring for the longest of time because she was my mother. So I don't have any grudges against her now, but I feel that she snatched away my beautiful childhood because I was always so upset. I was always so anxious. I was always so much in fear. I did not have a very free childhood. And eventually, when I turned 19, I went back to my dad. And, you know, my dad had remarried and he had children, but he welcomed me with an open arm. And now it's been, I don't remember how much time that this guy had said, but I think he had been with his father for the last 2 years or so. And he said, I'm very happy now. And there's so much of happiness in my father's home. And I feel really bad that I missed all of this happiness and, liveliness and then not bitterness. It's not that it's only my mother who went through a divorce. My father also went through a divorce, and it must not have been easy for him as well as it was not easy for her. But then he still decided to move on to rebuild his life and then be happy. And he, even though he has kids, even though he is remarried, I'm his son, and he now he tells me that he always wanted to reach out to me, and he always wanted to be a part in my life, but my mother did not allow that. And he didn't know what to do. So we have had so many conversations, and he was like, I feel bad for my mother now. So I think it comes around, maybe,
No,
away
so that's
from
the
all
only
the
thing I would want to
ridiculous.
say to add to what you said was what you said is a beautiful story, right? And it does happen, right? But let that not be a justification for not taking, because a lot of lawyers, judges, psychologists take the justification saying, "Oh, the child will come round to you. तेरा खून है,
Yeah,
आ जाएगा
right,
वापस."
right,
10 साल
right.
बाद आ जाएगा, right? The two data points that I want to share is only about 25% of the children go through that epiphany of realizing on their own, spontaneous realization, right? And by that
Hmm.
time, what he did not share was that the damage that had happened in his
Correct.
life,
I was about
on
to
his
say that.
life
Yeah, right,
is
right. It's a
is
damage that never, of course, I mean, all the regrets and all the damages that has been done to that child for that period of time, even though it's come around, cannot be undone, obviously. So, it's for the lawyers to say that this time that you're missing out with your child, just be there and let it be, and you'll get back. Of course, they don't understand the quantum of what they're saying because, like somebody said, only when you experience something like that is when you know what is it. So, yep. So, let me. I think I'll just take the conversation ahead for 7, 8 more minutes, maybe, and um, let's take some questions. I think there are a lot of comments. So everybody who is listening to us, thank you so much for having been there. I'm sorry I'm going to ask you to do it again, but I'm going to be taking questions only now. So if you have any questions, please send them to me. There are just too many comments. I'm sure I have missed out all of them. Uh, um, so can you, if you have any specific question that you want Dr. Kapoor to answer, please put that question now. Could you repeat that question? Okay, so Sean asked, how exactly can shared parenting be implemented if either of the parents are busy? How can someone compensate?
right.
I
Got it. No, I think so. What we've done is if you were to see, I'll be happy to send you my paper, which I've personally written on parenting orders, where I have created parenting plans or 20 different parenting plans. Let's say the child is less than 2 years of age, more than 2 years of age. The parents are living 200 kilometers apart, 50 kilometers apart in different countries, right? One parent could be working from, let's say, 9 to 9, Monday to Friday, right? So for all those eventualities, we've created parenting plans, right? Some amount of parenting plans are available. Even so, the Arizona Supreme Court has also created their own such things. So their website has this, but we have individualized it. So if you were to email it to me at bambootreeorg@gmail.com, I'll be happy to send you those parenting plans, which can be used in multiple situations. But to give you an example, see, certain parenting plans can be done where shared parenting can be instituted, where if the parent is just not available, is working from this thing, so 6 months here and 6 months there is one way. Second is just the vacations. So during the vacations, you will have to take your time out, and almost about 60 to 65% of the vacations can be spent, plus just the weekends can be spent together, right? So there are various permutations and combinations. We've created about 20 of them, keeping all of them this thing. But finally, where there is a will, there is a way. So if both the parents are willing to look at it, or at least one party is willing to look at it seriously, it is possible. But again, let me share another beautiful data point for you, right? Most parents think कि जब तक, and everybody feels कि जब तक both the parties don't agree, shared parenting kabhi nahi ho paega, right? Otherwise, if they don't cooperate or things like that, that was one of the part of the question, right? So the research on all successful shared parentings, almost about 30,000 such shared parenting successful shared parenting plans for the last about 10 years who've been successful has been done. Only 20% of them initially agreed. The rest 80% were forced by the courts, and over a period of time, they cooperated with each other. Does that make sense? Right? So it doesn't have to be that parents have to cooperate. So Ishian is what he asked. I hope that
Yeah.
answers your question.
I'm going to ask a very quick question, Dr. Kapoor. We're not going to go too deep into it, okay? But do you think they actually are also human beings, or whether it's dad or mother? I believe there are. I don't know what you think about it, but there are actually some people who do not act, who are very irresponsible. Deadbeat mothers, deadbeat fathers. Do you think there are people like that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So no question about it. Almost so physical violence, abuse, emotionally abusive, physically violent, domestic violence cases. See, I'm not a domestic violence denier. I don't deny
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
It's just I believe it's exaggerated, but that's a different discussion altogether, right? So
Correct.
all those parents definitely need help, and they need to be kept away from children, just the way
Yeah.
a severely alienating mother or father needs to be kept away. Similarly, an abusive father or mother, whether it's physical or violent father or mother, they need to be kept away from the child. I'm all for child.
Right. Right. Uh, there's an interesting question here. There's Ankit who is asking how can they support the PIL or the research uh, that Bamboo Tree usually does? How can people be a part of your initiatives or all that you do?
Oh, talk as much as you can about it. So wherever, see, the first thing that I would request all of you to do is, in your everyday life, in your family, trust me, if you now look at it after hearing this talk, you will see this happening in your neighborhoods. Intervene there. Make one step at a time. Go educate people about whatever you've heard from here, right? talk as much as you can among your friends. So the first impression, you remember the story that I gave you about the first time I got introduced in that school to the teacher friend, and I don't take your first impression that if a father or a mother is not there in a child's life, right? That means that this father or the mother is bad. Understand, empathize with that father, right? Or that mother. Talk to that father or mother. A lot of suicides I've seen is because of the social isolation that a lot of parents go through after they lose their child, right? Even in the society. So talk to them. It's one thing to say and do that, let me do some big things of filing a PIL, making, like you're doing some amazing work of making documentaries and movies, right? That's amazing. It's these small, small things which we do in our everyday life. I think they make a bigger difference. I may make 300 PILs or 1,000 such this thing, but a difference that each one of you can make while making a difference in the child's life on the ground is something that is unbeatable, right? Does that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah, of course, of course. Uh, Anuj is asking, can we request family court judges to make psychologists as part of a custody case?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question again? I lost it.
Yeah, it's on the screen right now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, can we request? Absolutely. In fact, what I mentioned in the talk earlier was the family court judges, which we met, 9 of them from Delhi itself, all of them pleaded with us. Please have them. We need help. So they must be part of it. Section 12 of the Family Court Act specifically gives that right to the family court judges. And in fact, there is a judgment by the Supreme Court of India which says use of mental health professionals should be encouraged in family courts, right? And the Section 12 of Family Court Act specifically makes that position as a mandatory position which should be present in the court. Therefore, can they be? The answer is no. They should be 100%.
Yeah. All right. Rahul has a question again. The judges take a stand that shared parenting can be done only when both parents are ready. Can there be anything done to use Kentucky as a case study where shared parenting was made mandatory?
Yes. So, as I said, there are 3 things that are being done. Number one, the judges are wrong when they say that only when both parents cooperate. That is what also, to a degree, Law Commission of India's 257th report also says. That is wrong. And I just prove it with data by saying only 20% of successful shared parenting plans were initially agreed by the parents. That's one, right? Number two, uh, the countries which do shared parenting by law are, of course, in US, certain states. So 3 states have passed it. I have a feeling over the next 2 years, another 20 states, the legislation is already there on board. Australia has already passed it, right? But in most other countries, starting from Spain to UK to all of them, they don't have it by legislation. They have it by what we call as parenting plans, right? So the courts have themselves created parenting plans which are almost as good as shared parenting, right? Which they have made almost mandatory, right? So that's definitely the answer there, right? Uh, I'll be happy. So this was Rahul Pass Crusader, right? So I'll be happy to send you the links to those things. You could write to me on the email with.
If I'm not wrong, Dr. Kapoor, I think Bombay High Court is doing some phenomenal work in this direction, right? I think they have encouraged shared parenting quite a lot. And I think Bangalore High Court as well, because probably of CRISP's intervention and I think some work on that side, right? So I think in India also, some high courts are now taking note, right?
Not really.
No? Not
Not really. So, what problem happens is that first they used to get about 2 to 4 hours a week. Now, a lot of them are getting one overnight a month, right? That
really.
is not shared parenting. That is definitely a step ahead and step forward from before what it used to be. We have definitely, so even Bombay High Court, yes, but Bombay High Courts and the Bombay lower courts are doing phenomenal jobs, right?
Okay.
Unfortunately, the high courts have been reversing them at certain points of. time, right?
Oh, okay.
What we have seen is there is a cycle. The moment you do an education workshop with the judges, for the next 6 months to a year, you see some amazing orders being passed, and then suddenly they fall back into, because new judges come in and those things happen. So it is still very judge dependent, so for
Right.
it's their
It's a very crazy question, but Aishin says, I'm all for shared parenting. It's awesome, but if his testosterone levels are lowered in males after holding their child, isn't it a bit concerning? I think I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna say something to that. See, Sheen, uh, right amount of everything is good. Too much amount of anything is bad. So don't worry. Just small reduction in the percentage levels of any hormones doesn't make any difference. What he basically meant to say was that it's a lot of femininity that's there in men as well when it comes to taking care of their kids, and it's outright wrong to think that men do not or cannot care for a child the same way women can.
No, let me
So
answer that again. So
okay.
the sexual your sexual drive
So
will
I
not
think we
be
have a no. I think we have a more. We have a yeah. I think we have a more relevant question there by Adil. It says, what at what age is the child most impacted in case of a divorce?
there is no such answer which is readily available. Actually, it's just that the children act out differently. So, there are two kinds of disorders which are there. There are the externalizing disorders, which is when the child acts out, becomes very disruptive, becomes aggressive, and all of that, right? Or there is the withdrawn disorders or the internalizing disorders, where the child tends to bottle everything up in. Both are equally bad, right? So, what we have seen is that it depends on child to child. The more adolescent ones tend to have externalizing ones, and the younger children tend to have internalizing disorders, right? So there is, but the alienation, the research has been very conclusive to say the age group between 8 and 12 years of age, right? If the alienation is happening, 8 and 12 is the most vulnerable age for the child for the alienation to happen. That's when they tend to
All
take
right.
sides and tend to become this thing much more.
Okay. I think that's about it. We are just short of 4 minutes than 2 hours. So I will conclude this discussion. I will conclude this discussion today. Thank you so much, Dr. Kapoor, for joining me. And I think there's a comment from Bamboo Tree itself for all the people who are asking how can they get in touch with Dr. Rakesh Kapur. Please send them an email on bambootree.org@gmail.com. It's right here on the screen right now, so you can take a note of the email ID that you can
Or
reach
send,
Dr. Kapoor at.
or
Thank you
send
so
me
much.
no, sorry, or send me you can also just on Twitter, Bamboo Tree 9. On Twitter, it's Bamboo Tree 9. So whatever makes sense to you.
Sure. All right. Thank you so much, everybody who joined this live. And thanks for standing by for almost 2 hours and listening to this discussion. Please share this so that more people are made aware of what we spoke about. And I think the most important takeaway is what Dr. Kapoor said, that try and make a change. Like Mr. Modi said, take care of, even if you take care of one family or anybody around where there is a problem, and you try to do something about that problem, then I think you'll be definitely making a difference. So please do share this video, and do talk about this issue more openly. And for anybody who is, being deprived of love, affection, and care of their child, don't lose hope. Don't give up. Be there. Um, I'm sure there will be a day when things will be okay. So have hope. Thank you so much. Hope all of you all are taking care of yourself in these times and in these circumstances. Take very good care of your health, not just physical, but emotional as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Kapoor, once again.
Thank you so much, Deepika, and
Bye
thank you
bye.
so much to all your viewers. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.